Hello, everyone. Welcome to the interview series Lessons from the Expert. Masco is a legal tech company introducing multiple legal tech platforms for the advancement and growth of a legal community of India as well as for the rest of the world. We plan to help the legal community of India go digital and help the Indian lawyers go through with an ease transition towards the digital economy and advanced technologies. We plan to do this by introducing career development platforms as well as to use platform tools that help the fraternity excel in the career. Now I request my friend Shivam Bansal to take over. Over to you, Shivam.
Thank you, Nisar. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our show, Lessons from Experts, which provides guidance directly from experts and professionals who are currently practicing law. Their experience would not only illuminate the nuances of their respective fields, but also construe the pursuance of law itself. Today, we are honored to have Mr. Rohan Batra with us. He is the founding partner at R&R Law Chambers, headquartered in Delhi with an associate office at Mumbai. R&R Law Chambers provides legal representation in complex and high-value commercial disputes before various courts and tribunals in India, with a specialized focus on in-house advocacy. He has also worked with Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas, and his practice areas cover arbitration, corporate commercial litigation, IBC, among other fields. Thank you so much for being here, sir. My first question to you is, what part of your daily job interests you the most?
First of all, thank you, Masco, for having me here. It's a privilege to be amongst all of you, and thank you for inviting me. And you guys have chosen a lovely evening today to have this session. Now, to answer your question, it's the most important facet, daily facet that I look forward to. Actually, when I get the chance to stand up before a it's not happening these days. These days we have to do it virtually, just the way we are doing it. But the most fascinating aspect, or in other words, that aspect that you look forward to or you get excited, you get jumpy about, is the aspect of arguing. That's always been something which has enthralled me since I joined the profession, and that passion is still there. Hopefully it will continue to be there. And for me, that's the most exciting part.
Thank you, sir. What is the first thing you would say to someone intending to pursue law?
Think twice. I would sincerely, jokes apart. So when I joined the profession, I was fancying the top lawyers, perhaps like most of us have, just to be like them. That's a good idea to begin with, but I would sincerely say that if you want to make law as a career choice, you genuinely must think twice. Not only because it's a profession which requires a lot of hard work, and we've all heard our seniors and experienced people say that law is a jealous mistress, it consumes a lot of time, but also because in today's world we have a lot of options. And that is why it's important to first step back and assess what other career options am I suited for. How much time do I want to spend working in our life? So over time, over a period of almost 10 years, I've realized that this profession is not for the weak-hearted. It requires a lot of hard work. And actually, if you can work hard, you have a great competitive advantage compared to a person who you can say is a bit lazy. So this profession requires a lot of hard work is number one. So whoever has the tendency to be a workaholic back in your college days or even in school, it's a profession suited for them. Whoever hates family time, law is the profession. Whoever doesn't like to go out and play, law is the profession. But apart from that, law is a profession for someone who likes to enjoy and play with intellectual concepts, who loves to talk and hear their own voice, maybe like all of us here. And it's a profession for those who believe that they can tirelessly pursue excellence. And that's something that I've learned over time. no matter how much hard you work, you can always grow. What you were in 2017, you're not going to be the same in 2018. What you were 2 years back, you're not going to be the same. And as long as you're progressing, you feel the real growth in this profession. And that's what really is fascinating about any profession and perhaps law. So choose wisely, I would say. And if you're in doubt, do dabble with it, and soon enough you'll form your own assessment.
So, what mistakes does a law student typically make according to you while in college?
Okay, we make a lot of mistakes. So on a lighter note, up till third year, I used to hardly spend time in partying. It's only after third year that I started to blossom in that sense, come out of that groove. And if I look back at those 5 years, I feel that it's actually the most special moments of our life. We won't ever get them back, hopefully, and it's a good thing. But when you're in those 5 years, you have to make the most of them. So it's okay to party, it's okay to study, but what's not okay is to actually lose out on one aspect while we're focusing on the other. I wouldn't say that studying is the most important thing, it should be neglected. Absolutely not. It must be a focus area. But at the same time, you have a wonderful opportunity to make friends, to develop contacts which will help you professionally and perhaps personally over the next 10, 20, 30 years. That's the kind of long-term vision we don't have. And we are either in the silos of people who party hard or the so-called nerd gang. So the idea is to have a mix and a balance. And if we can do that with a couple of mistakes here and there, it's absolutely fine. Well, quite frankly, the mistakes, other than the mistake I told you, was I didn't participate in the moots up till the first 3 years because I was actually extremely afraid. But something inside of me was telling me that you must experiment. Everybody is doing it. And from third year onwards, it started to take a huge turn from not doing any moots to about doing 6 to 7 moots in the next 2 years, 2.5 years, brought a huge amount of change and maturity in me as a person. So I would say don't neglect the opportunities that colleges give you. Make the most of it, grab them, have fun. If you make few mistakes, that's completely fine.
Thank you, sir. So, what does a firm really look for in a candidate while hiring them as an intern or an employee?
I mean, we all should shave. That's one. I haven't shaved. I've been sporting this beard for a while. But to be honest, it's actually a very difficult decision. How to actually select someone who's the right fit for your organization, or you don't want to neglect that person. What if that person loses out the opportunity? That's always a moral dilemma. Keeping that aside, if I have to objectively identify, let's say 5 or 6 criteria, what will I look at? Number one, the resume and the way the covering letter has been crafted. Now, why is that important? Everyone keeps saying that. We've all heard colleges, placement cells, law firms, HRs keep on telling you your CV should be spectacular, it should be immaculate, it should be perfect. Why is that? It's because it's the first step of your introduction to somebody else. It's your first impression. They haven't seen your picture, they haven't seen your Facebook posts, they haven't seen you on Instagram, they haven't played with you, they haven't studied with you, they don't know you. And that is why it's important for them to have a first impression of you. What kind of a person Shivam is, or how is Abhay, or how is Nisarg? They don't know that. They gauge that from what you put in your CV. So just few days back, I got a resume and a covering letter for some internship. and it was in blue and black ink. It was a mix of formatting. Now, this is something that I've also experienced before when I was applying for internships. And I used to try and take care that my CV is formatted perfectly, we use the same font style. But now when I'm sort of on this side of things and I look at a CV like this which comes about, you tend to feel that the person is not serious. So that is why, I'm so sorry. That is why it's important for us to have a very good CV which gives in 1 or 2 pages a brief idea about you. That is something which is extremely important. Number 2 is when I look at the CV, I rarely look at the college. For me, I look at what kind of internship experience that person has. And for me, it's important that a mix should be there. It should not simply be researching. You guys are brilliant researchers. You've done it all. You have the best of databases. But when it comes to the real life, the real work, you have to be able to take all those skill sets and apply it to real life problems. And that is where things like briefing a senior comes in. As an intern, you may not get that opportunity, but if you write something like that, I attended these hearings, or I participated or I assisted my seniors in a conference, or for that matter, I prepared a list of dates, I prepared a draft application. Those are things that give me an idea that this person has done some work. Otherwise, it's anyone can make those research questions up. So when you're looking at an internship experience, the intern or whoever that person is must try and take the maximum experience out of that internship. That is second. Now, these are things which are mentioned in your CV. The thing which I'm so sorry. The thing which I otherwise look beyond the CV is your interpersonal skills. How good of a communicator that person is. Ultimately, we're in the business of communication, and if we can't communicate properly, if we can't convey or express our ideas clearly, then there's a problem. We are a bit lenient with a yardstick like communication at this stage, but especially written form of communication is important. That's why the way you've crafted your covering letter, the way you've drafted your resume, and the way you write your emails becomes extremely important. Because if you're not able to speak to the client or to your senior, to anybody else, they can only see what's written on a white piece of paper or a digital paper, like an email. And that's how you gauge how serious, how skilled that person is. So these are 2 or 3 things I look at, and hopefully these things have served me well. So I would really request that whoever is applying anywhere takes their resume, takes their application very seriously. It's of course not a matter of life and death, so you guys can chill out right now. But it's important that we take these things with some importance. And as long as we are meticulous about these things, I think we all have a long way to go.
Thank you, sir. So does law as a field have enough opportunities to support the overwhelming number of people who are now pursuing law these days?
That's actually a difficult question. So back in 2011, when I had passed out, there were not many colleges, but there was still a substantial number of colleges which we thought were sufficient. At that point of time, and if my recollection serves me right, we had good job opportunities. But fast forwarded to like 10 years now, and I see that there are so many colleges. And by the way, many of those colleges are really good. There are more aspiring students who want to get into the profession than before. The question is, as you rightly put it, is there enough supply for them? is there enough demand for them from the perspective of the economy or from a job perspective? So my answer is that as far as the traditional jobs are concerned, those haven't grown as much as they should have compared to the number of students who've enrolled in. I remember reading a statistic about, I think, a year back. It said that in Delhi alone, in the last 2 years, about 10 lakh of lawyers have passed out in 1 year. And we all know if all of us want to aim for the top jobs, there are only those many vacancies. But what I'm starting to see is that the traditional role of a lawyer, or rather the traditional use of his skill sets, is changing. So there are more opportunities we see in in-house companies. There are more opportunities where lawyers are combining tech, as you guys have been doing, to become legal tech lawyers. And some people are going for international opportunities. So what's happening these days is because of the huge amount of supply of lawyers or students who are passing out, people are venturing into more roles which were considered non-traditional or non-conventional. And as a result, everyone's trying to find their niche of place in this profession. I'm not too sure whether everyone will be satisfied with what they're looking for, but that is again how the economy works. The moment there is an imbalance of demand and supply, the market has to correct itself. So even if we have too many lawyers today, not to worry, it's no guarantee that all of them will pursue law for the next 50 years. They might change, they might pursue MBA, get into a corporate job, or do something else. So a law degree is no longer the only route to entering a job in a law firm or maybe in-house. It becomes a stepping stone for someone to do an MBA, to join a big company outside India or join a big MNC. So I'm not too worried about the lawyers being too much, but yes, people should think twice again in terms of whether they want to pursue this profession. And as long as you're committed, you needn't worry about how many lawyers are trying to enter the market, because there's always going to be more.
Thank you, sir. Let's talk about arbitration. In general, arbitration's benefits are indisputable, but what does its gaining traction mean for the average lawyer?
I would say that for a regular guy, for someone who's been doing civil matters, he will most likely start seeing a bit of private adjudication taking place as compared to a courtroom trial. And that's been, I think, my own experience from what it used to be 10 years back, that every dispute used to be litigated in court. It's every second dispute which is there in court, and perhaps the other disputes are before an arbitrator. So as a commercial lawyer, as a civil lawyer, whatever you want to call yourself, you end up doing both. So for any regular lawyer, it becomes therefore a question of strategy at the time of drafting an agreement as to whether you want your client to go for arbitration or you want your client to go for a suit. That is all I think my takeaway of for any average guy. Now, this is besides the fact that you need to master the procedure of arbitration as much as you need to be a good practitioner of the civil laws in court.
So, what kind of legal value do international arbitral awards hold in the Indian market? Are they as enforceable as a court order?
So as far as international awards are concerned, the Arbitration Act 1996 provides for the awards passed in countries which have signed the Geneva Convention and countries which have signed the New York Convention. So depending on in which country the award has been passed, both of those awards can be enforced in India. So they're not recognized in that sense as a court order in terms of binding unless they are enforced in India. So typically what anyone with a award in their hand, an international award in their hand, would have to do is they'll have to file for an enforcement in India. Once the enforcement goes through, it means the court recognizes that there's an award. It recognizes that it has gone through the hurdles of the Indian legal system. And voila, you can go and get your money, you can go whatever the award provides for. So in that sense, the Act recognizes it. But if I want to do an apple-to-apple comparison of a court order which is being passed, which can be immediately implemented versus an international order, that may not be a fair comparison. It has to go through some rigmaroles of the Arbitration Act. But the Act quite fortunately provides for it. That if an award is passed outside India, if it's passed by any of these two countries, it will be recognized in India and will go through the enforcement mechanism to be enforced.
So what is the difference between ADR and CDR? And what kind of a role does a lawyer play in CDR methods like mediation and conciliation?
Okay, Shivam, if I get your question right, does CDR here stand for court dispute resolution mechanisms?
No, sir, it's a consensual dispute resolution.
Okay, so in both cases, if I look at the terminology, ADR stands for alternative dispute resolution, which means DR or mechanisms alternative to your typical court. And as far as consensual dispute resolution, they are also the same. The only difference is that we have started equating CDR with just mediation and conciliation, or mediation stroke conciliation. But if you look at the holistic definition of ADR, ADR is not just arbitration. It is arbitration, it is negotiation, it is conciliation, it is mediation, it is any other form of alternative dispute resolution, which can only be by consent. So apart from the difference in the terminology, I don't per se sense a difference. And that is how also the Act, the Indian law recognizes it to be. We don't have a separate conciliation law as of today. We have an Arbitration and Conciliation Act of 1996, where there are few parts in the Act dedicated to arbitration, and at the end, there is one part on conciliation. And the real difference between the two, as you all know, is that in arbitration, once both parties agree to arbitration, whatever be the outcome, they are bound by it. There's no way to wriggle out except to challenge it before a court of law. As far as conciliation is concerned, there are two levels of consent required. One is consent at the time of entering into the process. And the second is once the conciliator or the mediator has managed to help out both parties to reach at a mutually acceptable solution. That solution cannot be enforced unless both the parties at the second stage agree to the outcome. And that is how it becomes binding. That is the real difference between the two in terms of binding outcomes and the enforceability. But apart from that, there are different sets of procedures which apply to both sets of dispute resolution mechanisms. And there's just this minor difference in the terminology. But for us practitioners, it pretty much means the same thing.
And so, what kind of a role does a lawyer play in CDR methods like mediation and conciliation?
So when it comes to mediation and conciliation, the role of a lawyer changes drastically. If I compare it to arbitration, you're still the same lawyer as you were or as you are if you were in court, except that in court there's a judge, in arbitrations there's a private arbitrator. But you're still acting in an adversarial role. You're trying to defend or protect your client's rights. You're trying to get the best for him. When you're in mediation or conciliation, the change in mindset happens because there You're trying to find a solution to the problem. So you look at the problem not just legally, you look at it from a commercial perspective as well. And the process of conciliation is not entirely about who's right and who's wrong. Yes, that has a role to play. But beyond that, the idea is that this dispute should come to a closure and we should not open a can of worms. This dispute should not get prolonged. So with this change in mindset, the way the lawyer has to conduct himself completely changes. It is no more about showing this case law, making that argument. It is more about how can I ensure that the client reaches closer to the solution. And it's ultimately a settlement. So there's going to be a give or take. Nobody's going to be 100% right, or nobody's going to get a 0. Because it's a settlement, it's a conciliation, both parties will have to forgo something and both parties will hopefully gain something. And in that process, the role of a lawyer changes.
Sir, do you think an arbitration lawyer needs some extra set of skills as compared to someone who practices in court?
See, in India, the way we're doing arbitration, it's very easy to transfer the skill sets that you have in court into an arbitration. The major challenge, rather, between, let's say, an arbitration lawyer and court lawyer is time management. In arbitrations, you have limited time, or rather, I would say the courts in India are too generous when it comes to giving time to lawyers to make their arguments. Now, of course, that is changing too. And I say that with some responsibility. You don't get the same time as you used to get to make arguments. Arguments no longer span for days incessantly without anyone putting a stop sign in front of you. So time management is, of course, one important thing which happens or which is required for a skill set for a lawyer who regularly does arbitration. The second is doing a lot of document management. The life of a suit in India comparatively is much longer. So whatever filings happen, they happen in a paced manner over time. When it comes to arbitration, everything gets jam-packed into a year's time. Now it's 18 months. So all these pleadings have to be done, all those documents have to be read, all the evidence has to be read in that tight timeline. So you have to be more committed. So my own experience was at a point of time I was doing, this is 2 to 3 years back, I was doing about 3 arbitrations in a year, along with some court matters which used to come and go. And guys, I was completely exhausted. I felt that I'm burnt out. And now if you compare it to someone who's been doing court matters, you'll say I did about 15, 20, maybe 50 court matters in a year and I'm fine, I'm going on vacations. So this is the mindset change which comes, or rather the skill set change which comes when you're conducting yourself in an arbitration. It's a whole lot of time commitment as compared to court litigation. But besides that, the skills of advocacy remains the same. Of course, the judge is sitting right next to you, so you don't have to shout at his face. So that changes a lot. And it's, I would say, more organized in many ways. A lot of the court procedures are taken out and it's left to convenience of parties. So it makes things easier, yes. So I would say it's a much more relaxed environment compared to a courtroom, because you can have your healthy banter and immediately switch on and take on the role of a lawyer and defend your client. So I don't see a much difference in the skill sets other than the issues that I've covered.
So another question, students nowadays are paying very heavy amounts of fees in their law schools and they want to see returns in a similar fashion. They don't want to follow the hierarchy, the steps that one has to follow to climb up the ladder of being a lawyer, and directly want to go to the Supreme Court, right? And in lieu of that, how was your first experience being in the Supreme Court?
So my first experience in Supreme Court was quite fascinating. Luckily, as an intern, I got the chance to see a very good matter happening in Supreme Court, and I saw a huge number of lawyers were there. And this is just around the time when I was in my fifth year, and the arguments in this Balco matter had just begun. And I could see the doyens of our professions, Mr. Salve, Mr. C.S. Sundaram, and a whole lot of lawyers who have such flair in terms of their advocacy. And when I saw them in court, I was like, wow, I want to be like these people. And I was completely blown away. But at the same time, it had a leveling effect. That the distance between me and them is too great for me to start asking the premium that they ask, or start arguing in the way that they argue in Supreme Court. And no matter how much we want to recover that investment, yes, of course, there are other ways of reducing the cost, but we can't suddenly become them or suddenly enter the Supreme Court with a cape around us and say, hey, I'm here, you pay me my money back and this is how much I'm going to charge the clients. So that learning curve we all have to go through, no matter what. This profession is called practice for a reason. And when you see the players on the top, doing the top leagues, you understand the difference between them and you. And you know that things will come, but they will require some effort. Now, as far as the investment and the college fee is concerned, quite frankly, I think we all are living in a commercialized world. So even education has been commercialized like any other stream of business. It is no longer only a noble cause. Yes, some people are giving out education so that the youth and the younger lot gets groomed in a certain way, but that comes at a price. So as I said, that you have to weigh the pros and cons before you start. That spending 5 years, spending an X amount of money is worth it or not. But when it comes to law, let me be honest, and this is what my seniors have always told me. Don't think about the money right now. As long as you're not killing someone to get into education, it's completely fine. You will get that money back and perhaps heaps of it in the years to come. It's going to be slow traction in the beginning, but the moment you guys start, or I'm still learning the ropes, as they say, the moment we start doing that, you will start developing your own skill set. And once you do that, you will bring your own unique value to a client. And that's when you can command your fee. So if you ask me, I've recovered the college investment, or rather the investment made by my father. I was fortunate that he was there. And that investment many times over. So don't worry about it too much. I think by the time you all are doing wonderfully well in the legal profession would have taken a completely different turn.
So what are your thoughts about the recent trend in legal education since the guidelines passed by BCI and them changing how one gets to do their LLM?
No, quite. When I read the news, I was like, 2 years. I thought I'll get my LLM in 1 year. How can they do this? But there's, I think, a reason why they've done it. It's a policy decision. It's a decision which is based on the fact that you require a certain amount of time to be spent at an institution so that you can call it a master's degree. And I felt that there's a reason why Indian LLMs are not given that much credence or credibility if you compare it to a foreign LLM. And perhaps with a 2 years LLM, although even I find that it's perhaps a bit too much to get quality. We are taken more seriously if someone with an Indian LLM applies for a job. All said and done, I quite frankly don't feel the need for an LLM. I'm not saying I'm extremely well read and I know it all, but there's a certain use for an LLM. I would say it's not the natural progression after a BA or BB LLB that I have to do an LLM. You must assess why you need to do an LLM, and if you feel it's right, if it's meeting your educational needs, then spending another 1 year or 2 year compared to a practice of, let's say, 40, 50 years that all of us do, it's not much. So I won't be too perturbed by it, but yes, I would prefer that we raise our educational standards in a different way than just increasing the length of it. I hope that answers your question, Shivam.
Yes, sir. Now coming back to arbitration, do you think that arbitration or ADR in general is the future given the tremendous amount of pressure litigation is facing right now?
Absolutely. There are no two ways about it. The kind of litigation stress that we have in the country, the number of matters that this legal judicial system has to handle is immense. It's unparalleled, it's unprecedented, it's nowhere like this in any other part of the world. And you can have as many courts as you want, you can have as many judges as you want, but a large part of it has to go into ADR, where parties consensually enter, there are costs imposed, there are damages given, so that parties become wiser that it's better not to litigate, it's better not to arbitrate, it's perhaps better to just strike a settlement, live with the losses for some time so that one can focus on real business. But as long as they litigate, it's all good for us here. So we make our dough, we enjoy, and we make a living out of them feeling horrible about their matters. So, but yes, Shivam, to answer your question straight point, I think ADR is not just the future, it's already here. And I only see it expanding in different forms. My own take is that in the next 5 to 10 years, when the legal system of India matures further, we will soon be taking recourse to mediation and conciliation even more than what we are today.
Sir, do competitions of mooting or arbitration competitions, do you think that those help someone build their skill set while still in college and be more ready when they get out?
Absolutely. Goes without saying. What you study for the first 5 years. Let me take a step back. I had 10 semesters. We had about 70 to 80 subjects. Probably now there are more. Is it possible for anyone to remember all 80 subjects after 5 years of passing out? I don't think so. So the idea of telling you or taking you through this rigorous course of 5 years is to only make you familiarize with that there are these kinds of laws. There could be many more, but these are the important ones. The second aspect of making us read all of this is to get us into the habit of legal thinking. The way lawyers write, the way lawyers speak, the way they understand concepts, it's a different slant of thinking. It's a different kind of thinking. Different from, let's say, how a CA or an accountant or how a businessman would approach it. It's a different mindset. So it takes some time to cultivate that mindset within us. And that is why we have a course. This 5-year course is like a hub. And in this hub, we are breathing the same air of law, the BEAR Acts, the moot courts, etc. So there's a certain benefit of doing that curriculum. But trust me, believe you me, that is not the end of it. That is just the beginning. The real skill sets that you need are much different than from just knowing the law or where to find your BEAR Act. It's how to apply it to solve a legal problem. That is the main role of a lawyer. How to solve a legal problem for a client. For that, the skill sets are very different. The foundation is, of course, you get in law school. But to build it up from there, you need many more skill set. And a taste of that is when you go for internships, when you work with seniors, you see what they are doing. That is why internships become so important. They're also important for the reason that you also need to explore which out of those 80 subjects I want to pursue. You can't be a master in 80 of those subjects. You can't do family law and criminal law and commercial law and constitutional law all together in 1 year. You can build those capabilities and competencies over the period of time. But it's important to understand where your liking is, where your predisposition is. That's why internships come in handy. And of course, they help you get placed. Now, why wouldn't you do that if they help you get a job? So internships are extremely important. I would say whenever you get the spare time, go for internships, go for different kinds of internships, take risks in terms of internships, do an environmental law internship, work with an NGO, go for a corporate internship, do a criminal internship. In your 5-year course, you should have done, at least in the first 3 years, many different kinds of internships for you to have a taste of what is the kind of subject you want to lean towards. Once you get that, build those 3rd year, 4th year, 5th year internships into the areas you want to go into. So that by 5th year, you have a fair sense of idea. I'm probably leaning towards litigation. Or I'm those corporate guys. I like to do transactions. I like to do deals. I want to do regulatory practice. That's the kind of thinking you need to have. That's where internships help. And as far as moot courts are concerned, I'm not sure whether they train us for how to argue before a judge. They don't. There is still a divide in terms of what we do in college and what happens in reality. But it again gives you a taste of it. It teaches you how you need to merge theory, merge your understanding, and explain it to a judge. Do it impromptu, thinking on the feet. Those are again skill sets which are important. So it all depends on what we all take out from these kind of experiences or opportunities. But it goes without saying, and I can't emphasize it enough, that you must go for internships, you must go for your moot courts, especially if you get to travel outside your colleges. Why not? I mean, those are fun trips after all.
Thank you so much, sir. This session was extremely enlightening. It will benefit tremendously all the law aspirants who watch this session. And we are really grateful that you came.
And thank you, Shivam. Thank you, Abhay, and thank you, Nisal. And most of all, thank you, Masco, for this opportunity. I'm sure, I'm not sure actually whether I've been able to be of much help to you guys or to the people who would be listening. But if I'm able to help out any one of them, I think my task for the day is achieved.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome, guys. Thank you so much for having me here.